Welcome to our video notes on abiotic and biotic factors. We have two big essential questions we want to be able to answer. The first, what are the biotic and abiotic parts of an ecosystem? And then, how do organisms and populations in an ecosystem depend on and compete for biotic and abiotic factors? So we're going to start with thinking about the levels within an ecosystem. And let's start at the bottom. Organism, we've heard this before. An organism is an individual form of life, such as a plant, an animal, a bacterium, a protist, a fungus, one single living thing. Next up, we have populations. So a population are all of the individuals of a given species in an area at a certain time. So for example, the population of seventh graders at Transit Middle School. So it's all of the seventh graders, and you're all the same species, in one special place. So just within Transit Middle School. That would be a population. Not all the individuals are identical. You are all certainly not identical. Most importantly, not all members of the population are equal in their ability to survive and reproduce. Well, I'm hoping that you all are 100% able to survive because I love you. The levels of organization in an ecosystem. Step 3, community. So the population of organisms of different species in a specific area at a given point in time. Now, if you look at this picture, we have our elephants that we've been looking at, but we also have some zebras. There's a giraffe back there. It looks like an ibex. That's the crazy looking antelope behind there. So the community are all of the different species, but we're still looking at that one specific area. So if you thought of fifth graders and sixth graders and eighth graders as a different species than you, then all of the students at Transit Middle School would be a community. Now, when we say ecosystem, they're all part of an ecosystem. We're thinking of all the living, which are the biotic factors, and all of the physical non-living or abiotic factors in an area. And these two terms, biotic meaning living and abiotic meaning not living and never was living, got to know those terms. An ecosystem can only support a certain number of individuals based on the amount of food, water, living space, mates, and other resources available. So bio, that prefix means life. So it's living or once living organisms in an ecosystem. That includes the animals, the plants, the fungi, the bacteria. All of those are biotic. Abiotic. A is a prefix for not or without. So it's the not living parts of an ecosystem. So that would be water, air, soil, rocks, minerals, sunlight, temperature. These are all the abiotic portions of an ecosystem. Carrying capacity. So when we're thinking about how many organisms can survive in an ecosystem, we think about carrying capacity. It's how much this ecosystem can carry or support or hold up. And if a population exceeds the carrying capacity, some individuals will die or have to relocate to a new location. Determined by elements that we call limiting factors. So limiting factors are what determine our carrying capacity. A limiting factor could be an abiotic or biotic factor that limits the number of individuals that can live in an ecosystem. And it keeps the population from growing too large or too big so the ecosystem just can't support itself. How do biotic factors limit other organisms in its environment. All these are all little grackles competing with what looks like a prairie dog. Oh. So, how do the biotic, so living factors, limit other organisms? Competition for food. Those grackles are going after his snack. When resources are scarce, fewer organisms can survive. When resources are plentiful, a greater number of organisms can survive. Another thing that can limit organisms in an environment are predator-prey relationships. The greater the number of prey or food animals, the greater the number of predators that can survive. The fewer the number of prey, the fewer the number of predators. Parasitism. And we're going to dig more into this later in this unit. But parasitism is when an organism lives off of a host and can sometimes even kill it. So examples would be like tapeworms and whipworms in animal digestive tracts, mistletoe in trees, which is what you're seeing in this picture, pine bark beetles that invade and kill pine trees. These are all parasites. Disease. So when an outbreak kills off all or most of a population, so things like influenza outbreaks that can cause millions of human deaths. COVID-19, right? Our COVID pandemic is another example of something that can limit the amount of organisms in an environment. Lyme disease carried by ticks. These are all things that can limit living things that can limit our human population or animal populations. Human activities. This is a big one. Human activities destroy animal habitats through development. So building new communities, homes, neighborhoods, we destroy the habitat that's there. Damming rivers. We can flood areas that previously were exposed land and animals can no longer live there. It can also reduce the amount of water flowing through a river, and that really negatively affects the organisms that depended on that river. Clear cutting forests, that's what you're seeing in this picture, where we just cut down all the trees and just leave it bare. How do abiotic factors limit organisms in an ecosystem? The sun. Availability increases photosynthesis, right? We need sun. Plants compete for sunlight by growing taller than those around them. Temperature. Warm, lush areas support greater numbers of populations with less competition occurring. Cold, harsh areas support limited numbers of populations with greater competition occurring. Soil. Nutrient-rich soil produces more carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, all really important elements in order for plants to grow, and therefore support larger populations. So there's less competition for those resources because there's so much of it present. Nutrient-poor soils support smaller populations because there's more competition for those nutrients. Water. Availability, movement, temperature, saltiness, chemical components, which is like the quality of the water, all affect competition and ability to survive in populations. Changing conditions. Drought, flood, volcanic eruption, earthquakes all bring about changes that can reduce populations. All abiotic and biotic factors are interrelated, right? In nature, you will find that if one factor is changed or removed, it impacts the availability of all the other resources in that system.